Curiosity stirred first, soft as a breeze slipping between the shuttered buildings of Lone Peak. When the townsfolk noticed the thin young woman drifting down the frostbitten street as though she were made of breath and bone and little else. Elara Wynne moved with the fragile hesitation of someone who wasn't sure the world still had room for her. Her boots were worn through at the toes, her shawl torn where brambles had snagged it, and her eyes carried the dull shine of hunger that had lasted far too long. Yet even in her exhaustion, there was something quietly luminous about her, something that made people stop and look twice before pretending they hadn't looked at all. She had not eaten in 3 days, and the hunger made the air taste metallic and cold. Every inhale hurt. Every step felt borrowed. The town lay before her like a promise she feared to claim, one lined with wooden storefronts, drifting chimney smoke, and the watchful eyes of strangers who whispered before their words were even fully formed. She felt their judgment long before she heard it. Outsiders were seldom welcomed in Lone Peak, especially not ones with no coat thick enough for the winter or coin heavy enough for a bed. Elara kept walking, head bowed, hands tucked against her ribs as if she could press the ache back into silence. She paused at the window of the general store, studying the apples stacked in neat pyramids. Her stomach twisted hard enough to make her knees tremble. But she had learned painfully that asking for kindness often brought harsher words than asking for nothing at all. Still, desperation won. She stepped inside. Warmth hit her like a small mercy. The proprietor looked up, brows shadowed with caution, and she tried to speak evenly, though shame clung to each syllable. "Sir, do you have any work? Anything at all? I can sweep or stock shelves. I just need—" Her voice cracked before she could finish. The man's expression tightened. "You're not from here. And I don't hire trouble." He waved a dismissive hand toward the door. "Best move along now." The rejection landed with familiar weight. Heavy, humiliating, expected. Elara nodded silently and stepped back into the cold. A few women nearby, wrapped in thick wool cloaks, exchanged glances that were sharp in their pity. One murmured something under her breath, and though Elara didn't catch the words, she felt their sting all the same. She could not fall apart. Not here. Not yet. She made it 3 paces before her vision blurred. Breathless, she leaned against a post, praying the world would hold still long enough for her to gather herself. Snowflakes clung to her lashes. Her lips trembled. She whispered into her palms, as though confessing to the wind, "I haven't eaten in 3 days." A shadow moved. Elara didn't hear him approach. She only sensed warmth before she saw the man who cast it. Calder Boone stood a few feet away, broad-shouldered and still as a carved figure cut from the mountain itself. He wore weather-beaten leather, a fur-lined coat dusted with snow, and the calm, steady expression of a man who had spent more of his life with trees than with people. His rugged features were softened by a quiet curiosity, the kind that noticed small details others overlooked. He didn't speak right away. He simply studied her, carefully, respectfully, as if assessing whether words would help or harm. When he finally stepped forward, Elara straightened instinctively, bracing for another dismissal. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped loaf of sourdough, still faintly warm from where he had stored it beside his gear. He held it out with a gentleness that startled her. Her breath hitched. She stared at the bread as if afraid it might disappear. I can't pay you," she whispered. "I didn't ask you to," Calder said, voice low and calm, shaped by the quiet steadiness of mountain winds. "Take it, please." The please undid her more than the generosity. She accepted the bread with trembling hands, the heat seeping into her palms like a promise she had no words for. She tore off a small piece, savoring the softness, tasting salt and earth and something startlingly tender. She ate slowly, reverently, afraid of seeming desperate even though she was. Calder watched only long enough to ensure she was steady on her feet. "Come with me," he said. "There's a fire nearby you can warm yourself by. And you shouldn't be out here alone." Elara hesitated. Kindness often came tangled with expectations. But there was something different in Calder's eyes, something patient, unhurried, appropriate. She nodded. He led her a short distance to Maeve Hollow's sewing shop, where a lantern glowed behind the frosted window. When he opened the door, warm air filled the threshold, carrying the scent of wool and lavender. Maeve looked up from her stitching, startled to see Calder with a stranger. Her gaze flicked to Elara's trembling form, and though skepticism lingered, concern softened it. "She needs warmth," Calder said simply. "And a place to sit a spell." Maeve sighed, but it was the kind of sigh that ended in acceptance rather than rejection. She motioned Elara toward the chair near the stove. "Come on now, dear. Let's thaw you out before you freeze solid." Elara lowered herself into the seat, the warmth hitting her bones so suddenly she almost cried. Calder remained near the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed loosely. He wasn't guarding her. He was giving her space. For the first time in days, Elara felt the dizziness ease. The fire crackled softly. Maeve handed her a cup of hot water. Calder spoke only when necessary, but every word seemed chosen carefully, each one a step toward understanding rather than judgment. When Elara finally lifted her gaze to him, she found him watching her with quiet curiosity, the kind that held no assumptions, only interest in who she truly was beneath the hunger and the exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You needed help," he said. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew not everyone would have. Snow drifted outside in slow, whispering flurries, and for the first time since entering Lone Peak, Elara felt the faintest flicker of something she had nearly forgotten, the possibility that tomorrow might not be as cruel as today. And though she didn't yet know why Calder Boone had stopped, or why his steady presence felt like shelter she had never earned, she sensed that meeting him was the beginning of something she could not yet name, something that made her want, for the first time in a long while, to keep walking forward. Calder Boone returned to Maeve Hollow's shop the following morning, his boots leaving measured prints in the thin layer of new snow. Elara Wynne was already awake, seated near the stove with her shawl neatly folded in her lap, as though she feared wearing it too long might imply she intended to stay. She rose when he entered, grateful but cautious, and he noticed how she straightened herself in an effort to appear less fragile. Her eyes still held the lingering trace of hunger, but there was a steadier light in them, as if warmth had coaxed back a piece of her spirit. Calder offered her a nod, neither rushed nor hesitant. "Ready to step outside?" he asked. She nodded, though uncertainty flickered at the edge of her expression. He understood. A woman with nothing had reason to fear the road ahead. They stepped out together, the winter air crisp enough to make their breath form small clouds. The early sunlight poured gently over the rooftops, softening the harshness of Lone Peak. As they walked, Calder noticed how Elara turned her face toward the light, as though taking strength from the simple warmth. Yet her shoulders remained tense, as if she expected someone to shout that she didn't belong here. In truth, several people did stare. Lone Peak thrived on whispers, and anything out of the ordinary became fodder for gossip. But Calder's stride remained calm and solid, a quiet assurance Elara slowly matched. He led her to a small corral behind the butcher's shop, where his horse waited patiently. "We'll head toward my place," he said, tightening the saddle strap. "Warmer there. Safer." Elara hesitated again, not out of distrust, but from the lingering instinct to avoid becoming a burden. "You've done enough already," she murmured. Calder met her gaze with the unshakable steadiness that seemed carved into him. "You need a place to rest," he replied. "And I have space." It was not pity in his voice but simple fact, offered without strings. They rode slowly toward the edge of town, the horses' hooves crunching rhythmically over the snow. Elara sat behind Calder, hands lightly gripping the back of his coat for balance. She noticed the scent of pine clinging to him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing, and the way he seemed deeply attuned to the land around them. It comforted her more than she expected. As they traveled, the mountains rose like ancient guardians, their shadows long across the valley. Calder pointed out the path ahead, saying little, but every word he spoke carried a sense of intention. When his cabin came into view, Elara exhaled softly. The structure was modest but well kept, its chimney releasing a thin column of smoke into the sky. Firewood was stacked neatly, and wind chimes made from antler fragments clicked gently in the breeze. The place radiated quiet strength, much like the man who called it home. Calder dismounted and offered a hand to help her down. She accepted, her fingers briefly touching his, surprised again by his steady warmth. Inside, the cabin felt surprisingly welcoming. The hearth burned with an orange glow, casting a dance of light across the walls. Calder hung his coat on a peg and motioned her toward a chair. "Sit," he said simply. "I'll make something hot." Elara sank into the seat, grateful. She watched him move around the small kitchen with efficient ease, heating broth and slicing bread. It occurred to her that despite his rugged exterior, there was a gentleness in the way he handled even the simplest tasks, as though life had taught him to be careful with his strength. When he placed the bowl before her, he didn't hover or intrude. He simply let her eat in peace. As warmth spread through her body, she felt a quiet shift within herself. Gratitude began to root deeper than fear. After she finished, she spoke softly. "I'll work while I'm here. I can clean, cook, anything you need. I don't want to take without giving." Calder considered her words with thoughtful calm. "Help if you want," he said. "But you're not in my debt." The assurance settled over her like a blanket, steadying her breath. The next few days passed with simple routines. Elara fetched water from the stream and swept snow from the porch. Calder repaired a broken hinge, chopped wood, and tinkered with old tools. When they crossed paths during their tasks, their exchanges were soft but genuine. Calder asked her how she was sleeping. Elara asked whether he always lived so far from town. Their conversations were not grand or sweeping, yet each one deepened the quiet bond between them. She began to stand straighter, her movements gaining confidence. Calder noticed without comment, though the faint curve of his mouth hinted at a quiet satisfaction. One afternoon, while Elara mended a blanket by the hearth, a knock abruptly echoed against the cabin door. Calder opened it to find Sheriff Amos Redden, dusted with road grime. His expression was serious but not unkind. "Heard there's a young woman staying with you," he said. Calder didn't flinch. "There is," he answered. "She's recovering." The sheriff nodded slowly, studying Calder, then Elara over his shoulder. "Town's talking," he said. "But talk ain't truth." Elara tensed, expecting threat, but instead Amos offered a slight bow of his head. "Ma'am, you're welcome in Lone Peak. Anyone under Boone's roof is under his protection. Folks will come around." He tipped his hat and departed. Relief washed through her, mingled with disbelief. Calder closed the door quietly and turned to find her watching him with wide, searching eyes. "I didn't ask him to come," he said. "He just wanted you to know the town wouldn't run you off." Elara's voice trembled as she replied, "I've never had anyone stand for me before." Calder stepped closer, his tone gentle. "Then let this be the first of many times you're treated as you should have been all along." Spring arrived slowly, turning the snow to meltwater that trickled down the mountainsides. Elara grew stronger with the changing season. One soft morning, as sunlight drifted through the cabin window, Calder approached her with a stillness that held meaning. "Elara," he began, voice low, "I'd like you to stay. Not because you need shelter, but because this place feels different with you in it." Her breath caught, emotion rising like warmth from a long frozen well. She stepped closer, her voice steady. "I want to stay." Calder reached for her hand, not with urgency but with reverence. "Then stay as my partner," he murmured. "If you'll have that." The word settled deep in her chest, filling places hunger had hollowed. She tightened her fingers around his, gratitude shimmering in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll have that." And as he drew her into a quiet embrace, the world beyond the cabin felt wide and kind again, as though life itself had opened its arms to welcome her home.